Hey, Laura, it's so good to be back on the Soul Enchilada. I can't wait to hear what the next question is for this new year.
Yes, episode 9. Are you ready? Here is a question. I think this will resonate with everyone listening. If it's not you, you know someone, you love someone who would want to ask this question. Here we go. I have been dealing with depression for several years. I feel stuck and I cannot bring myself to reach out for help. I know I need to. How do I begin?
That is such a good question. I think depression is, first of all, it's with me right now. I often feel depression at the beginning of a new year. I have the post-holiday blues. So I just think this is a really relevant question. The days are short. We're sitting in darkness. A lot of people, really struggle with seasonal affective disorder, sad when the days are short and it's dark and we're not getting out very much. And we've just gotten through the holidays, which for many of us might have been very disappointing or unsatisfying for various reasons. And I just want to express some empathy for this listener who is struggling with depression and feels like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I go get help? First of all, I just want to tell her, don't be ashamed of it. Like, we all struggle with depression at a certain times in our life. And of course, clinically, there's a big difference between experiencing a short-term depression and going through a relentless depression that lasts 1 or 2, 3 years, right? Many of us experience depression, as we've talked about in other podcasts, when we go through a life change, when we go through a difficult time. But actually, for me, depression has been, one of the most helpful emotions I've ever had. I go through a depression about once a year, and often a longer sense of depression about once every 4 years. I go into what I call like a funk or a dark night of the soul. And what I've realized, at least for me personally, this doesn't resonate with everyone, but often I've gotten depressed when my life has gotten too small because I've been allowing fear, or I've been allowing some sort of bad habit or stuckness to take the lead in my life, right? Like, I get depressed when I eat everything I see and try to numb my emotions through eating, right? That makes me feel stuck and depressed. I get depressed when I feel like I'm being led to do something like this podcast project, but my fear is holding me back. Or my life situation, I perceive that my life situation is holding me back for some reason. And so I go through depressions or funks all the time. And the way I like to think of it is that depression is God's invitation to die to the old container, or die to the old habit, or die to the old fear and rise to the new, right? That God invites us, or the divine invites us through depression to take stock of our lives and go, where have I been living small? Where am I stuck because of some sort of fear or belief that's holding me in a state of paralysis, where I don't feel like I have agency or inertia? Do you resonate with any of this, Laura? Do you go into funks or depressions?
Well, first of all, I love how you're putting a spin on this, in the sense of that I live in a world, or I think the church world is often, be happy, make everyone happy. Joy, joy, joy down in my heart to stay. Whatever the
Mhm.
song is. Like we're to deplete it.
Mhm.
We're to fake it. We're to pretend like it doesn't exist. Like nobody wants to be around a depressed person. So come on, get happy, get positive. You can do it. And I just think what you're bringing to the table today is so relevant because the message that we're receiving in so many different spheres of influence is medicate it, hide it, pretend like it doesn't exist. And I feel like I've been given permission to share my sadness, my depression. I wouldn't call it a funk. I would say I go in and out of sadness and sorrow within a given day because I've been walking for almost 2 years through the darkest valley of grief. We're coming up on the second anniversary of Evan's death. And so I am aware. I'm very aware that my level of depression and sadness changes within a day, within an hour, within a minute. And I'm so grateful that I've been learning that it's okay. I give myself permission. And like you've taught me so well, Christine, to what do I need? Do I need more sleep? Do I need to spend time with my husband? Do I need to go on a walk? Do I need to listen to praise and worship music or calming music? Or do I need to exercise? Or do I need to tap into, a heavenly help and say, God, I
Mhm.
can't do this without you. I need you. And be in scripture. Psalm 23 is my favorite. Though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear not because I know I'm not alone. I'm not alone. God is with me. And so I am just curious. I want you to dive deeper into this. We so often think we should push away depression, but how can we step into it? And what gifts are hidden? What treasures can we find when we acknowledge and we give ourselves permission to feel it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a few things you just named that I think are so important, Laura, is that depression often like shows up as like a glob of lots of other emotions, right? Like I think of it as a glob of everyone's depression feels differently. Like it might be a glob of sadness, combined with a sense of helplessness, with a sense of hopelessness, with a sense of stuckness, with a sense of self disgust, like with a sense of shame. I mean, all these dark emotions that sound so awful and horrible. And it's important to understand what the kind of unique makeup of your depression blob is, right? Like, okay, I'm depressed because of this blob and this glob and this dark emotion,
Wait, we're
right?
blobs and globs? I'm so
Globs
confused. What's the difference between a glob and a blob?
well, a clinical way of talking about this. But I think your depression looks different than everyone's depression, right? We all have our own unique depression. And I want to just, say that there's clinical depression, which my mom talks about and struggles with, which is a biological, something she inherited. We have a long family history of chronic clinical depression in our family. So that is, and there's a condition called dysthymia where, this is a long-term haul. Okay, so this is different than that. I'm talking about more of a situational depression where you're, for whatever reason, in a funk or a deep time of helplessness, hopelessness, sadness, and despair. Okay. And here's the first thing I wonder about is like, what is the invitation here in this depression? Where am I feeling stuck? What is the invitation? I love one of my favorite rabbi authors, we'll put him in the footnotes, wrote about and speaks about how a lobster grows. And I love this whole concept because he talks about how lobsters are crustaceans. They have these hard shells and they can't, their hard shells don't grow with them. So how does a lobster grow? Well, what happens is what we know is that lobsters start to experience this incredible sense of pain over time, right? Like as they start pushing out of their shell, they experience this incredible sense of pain. And lobsters don't like to shed their own shell. right? Which I think is just so human too. They don't want to have change. They don't want to make themselves vulnerable to shed their shell. That's what protects them in the world. But they get to this point where it's so painful to stay in their current shell that they have to go underneath a rock, make themselves vulnerable, shed their own shell, and then take up to weeks to grow their new shell. And I love this analogy of how a lobster grows, because I kind of feel like oftentimes that's what depression is doing. Depression is like the signal that our body gives us that we are stuck in a small shell and that we have a bigger shell waiting for us. But we need to do this work that might take exposure or vulnerability or mild or deep discomfort to move into a shell that is now worthy of us. So whether you're stuck in a relationship that's not, serving you, whether you're stuck in a job or a situation that's not serving you, whether you are in, some sort of any situation, family-wise, where you're stuck, where you need a new shell, girlfriend. Depression is often a signal that you have outgrown your old life and you need to die to something so that you can rise to the new. Whether that's dying to an old relationship, whether that's dying to an old addiction, whether that's dying to an old fear, or a way that you shame yourself, or some sort of old strategy you're using. You've outgrown that strategy, girl. Welcome to the new year. It's time to put it to death and rise to the new thing. I mean, that's one message of depression.
That's incredible. That's incredible. I think I'm going to be constantly thinking, am I a glob? Am I a blob? Or am I a lobster?
Stuck in my life.
And then, okay, I'm a lobster. I've outgrown my shell. Okay. Side note, I love lobsters. I love eating lobsters. And now I have a whole new look on lobsters. My husband tells me that they're insects that you should never eat and that they were for prisoners and in Maine, and just set that aside. I love your analogy, because so often we become uncomfortable because God is calling us to grow. God is changing us. And you think about, I think the greatest adventure in this life is to follow Jesus, because when we do, he is going to change us, transform us from the inside out over and over. While we still have breath on this earth, we are called to become more like him, less like myself. And that's my spiritual take on things. But there are other people who would say, I'm thinking Maya Angelou, she taught on how change is painful. Change is painful, but the reward is greater. And so I look at someone like her. I remember seeing her in Boston. She stepped on stage and she sang, "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine." And I believe that she changed lives through her poetry and her work and the things that she said and how she treated people, and her legacy lives on. That's the kind of life I want to live. And so that means we change, we grow, and pain is part of it. Pain is part of it. I was sharing with a group of women just recently, an empowering group of women, and we were talking about how our hearts through pain grow. They get stretched to capacities far greater than we could ever imagine. And sometimes that's the call upon our lives, to step in and advocate or have compassion for people you would never have compassion for. I talked with a woman who's in charge of global missions, and she lost her father at such a young age. And so she has compassion for children who are suffering. And so that's a perfect place for her to keep running her race, and perfectly placed through pain for a purpose. I love this, Christine. Thank you so much. This is fantastic.
Yeah, we will explore this in so many other ways about how dark emotions and things like depression and pain is always an invitation to growth. And growth is inherently uncomfortable. Like nobody signs up for growth and goes, please, please expose me to the discomfort of new growth. No way. And so I just love all those analogies you're sharing, because as we head into a new year, and you might be listening to this at a different time, I'm just so aware that women who are evolving, who are growing, who are emerging into their new life, into a new sense of purpose and passion, have to face a lot of pain and discomfort. Just like for me, getting my butt to the gym involves incredible pain, incredible discomfort. I hate it all the time. I hate exercising. Sorry, ladies, those of you that love it. I hate it. I hate running. I hate doing any of those things. I don't get runner's highs, but I do the pain because that is the only way I can prevent my muscles from atrophying. Right? Like I just got to do it because it's about growth. It's about a growth mindset. And in the same way, emotionally, we just don't grow without a catalyst. And so thank God for depression. That has been such an important catalyst in my life. And I just want to, give a shout out to this listener, this reader, and say, hey, be bold about sharing. I'm depressed. This is not a sin. There's no sin in being depressed. Go to someone that you trust, find a therapist, find a trusted friend, and just start talking about it. What's the root of your depression? What blob, what glob is going on there for you? And what is the invitation for growth buried deep beneath the soil of this dark emotion? And where might it be leading you in this new year?
That's exciting. That's exciting that something that we think we need to deplete or get rid of, like depression, can actually be a catalyst for growth, a catalyst to help us move, help us change, help us to become the woman that we are to become. That's a great way to start the new year because it gives us hope. It gives us hope that God's not done with us yet, or our potential hasn't been reached yet, or there's more in store, or we're just getting started. What I find is when I have these real, raw, and relevant conversations with girlfriends, and I go first and I share where my depression is affecting other areas of my life, it's an invitation to them. It's an invitation to her to say, me too. I feel that way. You're not alone. I experience that. And although you explained it, our globs are very different. Our parts are very different. We find community and we find compassion when we're vulnerable enough to share our darkness and our depression with others. So I would just make this an invitation to women as you're listening to this. Who could you reach out to? Who do you trust? Who you could be vulnerable with and share that God's not done with you yet. Greater things are in store, and you can use this to step into the new year. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Christine, so much for giving us wonderful tools, hope for the future, hope for today. Thank you. We need it today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, God's not done with us yet, Laura. Or us. We've only just begun.
That's right.
That's so enchilada.